What the hell is the survival game mode? What do I do when I spawn? Which weapon should I take? What is the best skill for me to use? All of these questions and more will be answered in this complete guide to survival, so do stick around. What's up guys, it's Skill Up here. Today we're going to be talking through survival. It can definitely be quite scary the first few times that you do it. You don't really have an idea of what's going on. It all seems very different. So in this video I'm going to be taking you through exactly how it all works and giving you plenty of tips along the way to ensure that your extraction is as smooth as possible. Guys, if you like this video, do be sure to drop it a like and of course subscribe for plenty of the Division patch 1.5 coverage. And with that, let's get straight into the video. Right, so what is survival? First up, this is a separate game mode that is completely separate from the regular progression of your character. When you start survival, you begin with no items that you sort of own on your base character. You start with random assortment of basic green gear and a simple green pistol, and after that you need to make your way. So all of the items that you've collected up to that point have nothing to do with this survival run. It's a completely separate mode. The objective of the game is to survive long enough to enter the dark zone and collect an antiviral, after which time you then craft a flare gun so that you can call in an extraction and escape. Now of course there are plenty of things along the way to slow you down, things like hunger, like an infection that is constantly trying to kill you, like biting cold that is constantly draining your health, like all sorts of enemies blocking your path, and finally the Hunters, a special type of NPC that spawns specifically when you extract, and they are very tough hombres. A successful extraction nets you a certain score along with a certain selection of caches that you may have collected along the way. You get to crack all of those caches open, and that gear you do keep on your main character. So while you don't enter with any gear, you do walk out with some gear and you do get to keep that on your main character. Let's be clear though, if gearing up is your objective, this is the worst way to do it. Survival is one of the least efficient ways to collect gear, so if that's your objective, steer clear of survival. Survival is about moments, it's about stories, it's about experiences, it's about PvP, it's about all that other stuff. It's definitely not about loot. So if loot is your thing, survival is not going to make you happy, but if you want some really interesting gameplay and some really tense PvP experiences, then survival is definitely going to be for you. So how do you start a survival game mode? Well, you head down into the terminal, which is here, and then you walk to your right, and here you see a little door. You're able to walk up to that door and you can queue. You can either matchmake into groups for this, or you can do it solo. It's entirely up to you, or you can obviously go pre-made groups, totally up to you. But I will say that according to the developers, the game tries to match solo players with other solo players and groups with other groups. I can tell you though, I definitely don't expect that to work particularly well. Every game that tries this fails spectacularly in this regard, and you can always expect to come up against groups if you are playing solo. So my advice to you is try and group up, particularly if you are playing in the PvP mode, since any time you as a solo player come up against 4 other people, you are going to die. So after you've selected either solo or matchmake, after you've selected either PvP or PvE, you'll then be placed in a queue. When that queue fills up, your game will begin automatically no matter what you are doing. So make sure you're ready for that queue to pop. You'll go through a small cutscene which you can skip, and then you are straight into the action. So here's where the important stuff begins. When you wake up, there is going to be at least one fabric item in the room around you. So make sure you fossick about until you find that. Go straight over to the table and then craft yourself a pair of warm something or other. Look at whatever is going to give you the most warmth and then make that thing. The biggest challenge that you're going to face as soon as you step outside is the cold, so your main priority is getting warm ASAP. Craft it quick and then get the hell out of there and head straight for the crash site. Now the helicopter crash site is your #1 objective, and it's where the game really begins in my view. Now the decision is entirely up to you, but be careful. Obviously, if you're playing in the PvE game mode, don't worry about it, no one can kill you there. However, be aware that only one person can collect each item at the crash site, so it's first in, best dressed. With the crash site out the way, you can now take stock and think about your next move. And this would be a really perfect time to talk about the survival elements within the survival game mode. There are 3 different things that you need to keep an eye out for if you're going to stay alive and make the most of your experience. And I'll talk about them in their order of importance. Now, the first one, the most important in my view, is actually water. Now, water quenches your thirst, obviously, and what it actually does in game is it allows you to see items on the ground or caches or chests far more easily. You're going to find as you traverse New York in the snowstorm, it's almost impossible to see different chests. They're very hidden. They only sort of show up at all when you get very close to them. And sometimes you're going to be really stunned that you walk past a certain area only to return to it a second later and be like, how on earth did I just miss that chest? Happens all the time. Having your thirst quenched actually increases your sort of vision. It allows you to see these things more easily. They are highlighted for you. You can actually see through walls as well. And this is, in my opinion, the most important survival element in the game. If you can keep your thirst quenched, you're going to collect a lot of items, and it's going to be very easy for you to collect what you need to stay alive. So in my view, that's number 1. Number 2 on the list is food. You're going to collect things like canned food or energy bars, and what they're going to do is they're going to allow you to regenerate health. When you have the hunger status effect, you will no longer regenerate health when you take damage, which leaves you very exposed. So obviously keeping some food on you is very useful. My pro tip there is actually not to consume the food until you actually need it. Very often you may see some food, pick it up, eat it. You won't take any damage during that period where your hunger is satiated, and then after that, that's been a complete waste. So make sure you only pop that food when you need it. It's going to be the best use of that consumable. And the final thing that you're going to need is medication. Now, there are painkillers, or there's medicine, and all these things essentially do is keep you alive longer. When you begin the game, you are going to be afflicted by an infection. It's going to kill you in 1 hour unless you keep yourself medded up. The thing is, though, 1 hour is actually a very long span of time, and you are going to get, generally speaking, more than enough medication along the way to keep yourself alive. So me personally, I wouldn't be too worried about this. Yeah, sure, absolutely. Drop it when you get it. Make sure you consume it. It's helpful, absolutely, but most of the time, especially after the first 1 or 2 runs through survival, you're going to find that an hour is well and truly enough time. So I personally would not be too worried about the medication. All right, so now we've talked about the crash site, we've talked about medication. Let's talk about safe houses and crafting your gear, and in particular, what to craft. So throughout the map, you're going to find plenty of hideouts. There are tons and tons of them. They're really good because the first person there actually gets to collect a set of unique items that drop in there, like, fabric or tools or whatever else. So they're really handy to find if you're the first one that arrives there. But then after that, you can use the crafting bench, and it's there that you'll make your first weapon. And in terms of weapons, I think it's pretty simple here. My advice to you is, generally speaking, to craft yourself an LMG, in particular an M60 or an M249. These weapons are extremely powerful in the survival game mode, and also in the main game, to be honest with you. They have huge magazines, they have really nice accuracy over time, they work very well at long ranges, which is important. I'll talk more about that in a moment, and they're generally pretty easy to manage without mods. So for that reason, I think that this is your best pick. After that, you may want to consider something like an assault rifle, if you, as in, for your primary weapon. People really enjoy those. I don't like them in survival because you can't really mod it that well, and generally speaking, assault rifles need quite a few mods in order to be good because they have so much base instability. So I personally like to steer clear of them. They also have much smaller magazines than the M249 or the M60, so for that reason, I always prefer the LMGs. They're nice go-tos. You may also want to consider in your secondary slot a sniper rifle. Now, these can be really good. They're really good at engaging enemies at long range, which is very important in survival. You don't want to get up close and personal with anyone, because basically enemies can really wreck you very, very fast, particularly at the beginning when you're just starting out. You don't have much gear, you don't really have abilities, your stats are terrible. You're going to die really, really fast, like unexpectedly fast. So you want to be engaging everything at range. Marksman rifles are great for that. However, the fog, or the snow I should say, actually makes it really difficult to see targets. So I don't like them for that reason. I like to use them as a bit of a backup, certainly not as a primary weapon. Now, the decision that you make about your secondary weapon, I think, is going to be determined by the mode of play. So if you're playing in the PvE game mode, I definitely recommend a sniper rifle. And an SMG or shotgun, that's fine, but it doesn't really help you out that much because you're generally going to be able to control the distance of most of your engagements. With PvP, however, we all know that that sort of stuff happens much more up close and personal, and that's where the SMG and the shotgun really shines. In particular, burst damage is much, much better on those weapons, and also an assault rifle. So stuff like the M60 and the M249, really great in PvE, good for controlling those engagements, but in PvP, you may want to consider something like an assault rifle, SMG, or shotgun to give you that versatility to be able to operate either at range or up close and personal, either sustained DPS or plenty of burst when you really need it. So make the decision based on what you think is going to work for you. Beyond that though, when you start thinking about crafting gear, my advice to you is actually to not craft gear at all and only focus on crafting warm sort of cosmetic items, not the actual core gear like backpacks or knee pads or whatever else. Reason for this is that when you craft them, they can actually roll with firearms or electronics as base stats, and those are not stats that you want in survival. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with me about this, but in my view, survival is very much about toughness. That is the number one thing. You need to stay alive, especially at the beginning when sort of PvE targets can hit you really hard unexpectedly when you're very exposed. Toughness is king in this game mode, and if you make an item and it happens to roll with lots of base electronics, it's pretty much useless to you, especially given the fact that you actually don't have any skills for the first half of the game. You only get them towards the end. So my advice, save your fabric, save it for other things, save it for your skills, save it for, you know, when you need to extract, save it for your warm weather gear, but don't use it on crafting actual gear because I find more often than not, it is not useful to me. As you progress through, you are going to have the opportunity to craft skills, and you're going to be asking yourself which is the best skill to run with. And to be honest, this really depends on how you're playing, whether you're playing solo and going full gung-ho and farming everything, whether you're playing a more stealth style of approach, whether you're playing in a group, PvE, PvP, it entirely depends. Certainly heal and pulse, you really can't go wrong with those. Heal will heal you for about sort of 2/3 of your health at the base amount of electronics that you're likely to stack. Pulse is obviously going to give you a nice little damage boost and more crit chance, which is going to be very helpful, but lots of other skills are also really useful. In particular, the ballistic shield is great because it allows you to basically DPS stuff while not taking any damage. Very, very helpful. And the turret can actually be really nice as well because it can survive for quite a long time, and it can actually distract or tank enemies, particularly the hunters at the end when you're trying to extract. But regardless, anything is going to work, you know, as long as it's not like mobile cover, for instance, you're going to be fine. So just choose something that works for you. But my advice, if you're playing solo and you'd like to be nice and safe, take heal and pulse. It's probably going to make it easiest for you. All right, so we're getting down to the business end now. You know what you're doing. You're all geared up for it. It's time to head towards the dark zone. So it's important to understand that the level of enemies actually increases as you get closer and closer to the dark zone. As you step out into the world for the very first time, you're going to notice that the enemies are sort of around level 28, and the closer that you get towards the dark zone, they're going to level up and up until they eventually reach level 30 in the middle of the dark zone. You're going to face more and more veteran and elite enemies as well, so be aware of that. As you're finding yourself progressing further towards the dark zone, if you're really struggling, if you feel like you haven't got all the materials that you need, my advice is just to do a 180, turn around and just go straight back the other direction and start farming those lower level enemies. They're going to be a lot easier for you to kill, and they're still going to drop you plenty of stuff. One thing that I'd really strongly recommend that you do is seek out landmarks. You're going to see these on the map. They're very similar to what they look like in the DZ. However, here they are just clusters of veteran or elite enemies. Now, these guys have a higher chance to drop better loot, so clearing them out is really helpful. However, obviously, it's very risky to do so, particularly if you're playing solo. So my advice is, if you're in a group, go straight for these. You're going to be fine. You're going to be able to res each other if you die, no big deal. If, however, you are playing solo, I'd probably steer clear of them until you collect yourself a little bit of loot, until you're tough enough to be able to take them down, and then look to farm a few of them, because they're going to be very lucrative. They're going to give you plenty of stuff. They're going to make it much easier when you eventually head into the Dark Zone. At this point, with you geared and farmed, you are now able to craft a mask so that you can then enter the DZ. Simply visit a hideout, select the mask from your crafting list, make it, and now you can step into the Dark Zone without dying immediately. As soon as you enter the Dark Zone, it's time to get the hell out of the Dark Zone as soon as possible. You're going to find lots of veteran and elite enemies in there, so watch yourself. You're also going to find plenty of sealed caches lying around. You pick those up, and if you manage to successfully extract, then you're going to actually be able to open up those caches afterwards. So try and collect as many of those as you can. You can hold up to 6, and trust me, you won't struggle to meet that number. There are a lot of those caches around the map. Your goal when you enter the DZ is twofold. The first is to collect the antiviral. If you open your map and look for the magnifying glass on the map, you will see the antiviral marked there. Key thing to note is that if you're in a group, you actually only need one person to collect the antiviral before you can leave. So what you do here is you'd speak to your group members, you'd ask them who has the closest antiviral, you'd head straight to that one, collect it, and then you're going to be ready to go so long as you craft the flare gun. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But yeah, you don't need to collect all of the different antivirals for everyone in your group. Obviously though, if you're running solo, you do need to collect it, head to it, clear the enemies, pick up the item, and with it will come a division tech. And this division tech is very important because it is what you will use to craft the flare gun, which will allow you to extract. Head to a hideout, craft the gun, head to an extraction zone, and then call it in, and then get ready, because this is when the hunters turn up. Now, the way this works is that the hunters will spawn one hunter per person at the extraction zone, and any additional person that rocks up to the extraction zone while the extraction is taking place will also call additional hunters in. So be aware of that. If you see people entering your area while you're fighting hunters, you can definitely expect more hunters to be joining as well. They have a variety of abilities. They can heal themselves, they can medkit, they drop support stations, they drop cluster mines, they drop all sorts of stuff. They have a very full kit available to them. They can be very tough, and if they get you down, they will then bum rush you and then axe you in the face to finish you off. It is not a pleasant end. So be very careful when you're fighting these guys. Best thing I can suggest is just to take it nice and slow. Stay in cover. As I said, the turret is actually very good for distracting them, allowing you to DPS them down. They actually don't have that much health. The challenge is killing them before they medkit themselves. So long as you can burst them down fast, you're fine, but the challenge is just getting them down nice and quick. Once you've done that, hang out at the extraction zone, board the chopper, and then you are done. You're going to see the post-game screen where you're going to be able to see how well you've done, and the higher your score, the more loot caches you are awarded. I think you can earn a total of about 15 at the end of a very, very successful run. So it's not too bad at all, given that each of these caches actually gives you quite a bit of loot. So that's that. But look, that's it, guys. That's survival. And as I said, survival is very much about experiences. It's about moments. It's not about loot. So don't worry too much about what you happen to get out of those caches. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that you've had this survival experience and you've been able to do that on your own or with friends or whatever. And it's either PvP or PvE focused experience that's fairly unique in the AAA gaming landscape. So anyway, I really enjoyed. I really hope you guys do. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below about how you plan to tackle it. But for now, guys, thanks very much for watching. I know it was a long video, but I wanted to cover everything in detail. If you liked the video and you found it useful, please do drop it a like. And of course, you can subscribe. For now, guys, thank you very much for watching. Take good care, and I'll see you in survival. Bye-bye.